Their leaders have performed when the expectation has gone altogether. Their season was done and dusted. Now they're back in the mix. What impact does that have on them? Because they weren't able to withstand, and that was my big question with them at the beginning of the year. Were they going to be able to withstand the expectation and accept that expectation and then still be able to go and get it done?
They've won 3 in a row, the Blues. They're back in the hunt, but one of the all-time greats, Nathan Buckley, with you on radio this morning, Cornsey, questioning whether just now the pressure gauge is off, it works for them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair and reasonable observation from Bucks. But the counter to that would be, well, you spoke 3 or 4 weeks ago about Michael Voss coaching for his job.
Yeah.
So if the players had capitulated and lost, then we'd be critical of them. So then we can't be critical of them for standing up, changing their game around, turning their form around and having a big win. I thought it was really impressive. Some would say and question the opposition in Fremantle, but I thought it was a strong performance. So I look at it more positively than what Bucks did.
There's their next 5. I mean, if they somehow manage to beat Port Adelaide, Cornsey, which you think is unlikely at the moment, they've got West Coast at home and then a Friday night contest with Collingwood. They've found their way back into the season, Lordy.
Oh, they were struggling to win any game of football whatsoever. So to win 3, even though these teams are ranked lower on the ladder now than Fremantle, Hawthorn and the Gold Coast Suns, it's a great win. They'll be right in it, I think, against Port Adelaide this week. That's how well they're playing. And I just think, look at these numbers the last 3 weeks. So to me, their midfielders got right on top. So full credit to Cripps, Walsh and Doherty. And then Jacob Wiedering is back to his best in defence. But look at that, they're scoring. When your midfield gets on top, suddenly Kerno and Mackay aren't jumping on top of each other's heads. The small forwards have got back involved. So, they'll be tested against Port Adelaide more so than the previous teams. But they're well back and truly in this and only 1 game out of the 8.
And it was the opposite story, wasn't it, for their opponents, the Fremantle Dockers and their coach, Justin Longmuir, lost for answers really after the game.
Definitely in that third quarter we internalised, got stuck in our own heads. And, the scoreboard got out of control. Players would have been worrying about that, worrying about their own form. And we just went away from any resemblance of a connected brand.
Well, Justin would be asking a lot about himself and the team and the brand, but he'd be able to ask himself, what am I doing wrong that we start so poorly week after week? So take a look at these first quarters. They've won 2, they've lost 21 of the last 24 first quarters.
So is that a senior coach issue?
So, he'd have to ask himself why. They would have changed warm-ups, they would have tried all these different things, but he's not a motivator to me. He doesn't look like a motivating type, and you can't motivate to a point where it becomes fake. I remember we used to have a go at Port Adelaide that it's they ride a wave of emotion. But I think Justin needs to try and, I don't know, I'm sure he has themes and things like that, but his players are just so flat at the start of every game that he has to ask himself, is it me and what could I potentially do different?
I agree with that. A few weeks ago I was critical of him going to the interchange bench and he was just sort of sitting there. He wasn't engaging with his players. You see the coaches coaching from the bench, they're up and they're engaging, they're talking to their players, they're motivating. So perhaps he's got to come out of himself a little bit, and I think that the loss of Josh Carr, who's gone to Port Adelaide, he looked after their midfield last year, has been significant. Speaking of their midfield, they've got $1.7 million tied up in 2 rucks, and the numbers yesterday were extraordinary. Carlton lost the hit-outs by 52. They lost the hit-outs to Advantage by 18, yet won the clearances, won contested footy and outscored them by 22 from stoppage. So I said 4 weeks ago that I would trade Sean Darcy, and a few people laughed, and Luke Jackson had a couple of good weeks, but this is what you're going to get.
That's not the ruck's fault.
It is, Cara. It's the influence that the rucks have. No, it's not the ruck.
It's the midfielder's
It's not the ruck's fault, but it speaks to the value of having 2 highly paid ruckmen on your list, that Carlton can go there with Young and Silvani and win the stoppage. So you don't need 2 of them. You may not even need 1 A-grade ruckman. They've got 2,
Doesn't that
paid
bring
a lot of money.
into question the rest of the midfield and the coaches?
No, well, it does, of course. But the role of the ruck and their value in a side, I think, needs to be questioned. And I would look to trade Sean Darcy, who would have significant value, and bolster the midfield and get some A-grade talent into that group.
And just to be clear, Mike Jackson, you're
your
number 1 ruck.
He's not a forward.
But can they go forward with Jackson as their number 1 ruck?
Yes, of course they can. He's a very solid ruckman. They don't need 2 of them.